special guest tonight. Jayne Allen, in her life outside of writing, is a serial entrepreneur, a Harvard-trained attorney, and an engineer. She dabbles in stand-up comedy, which I didn't get to ask her about before we came on. I want to hear all about that, Jayne. She tries to learn one new thing a week and relishes laughter and champagne bubbles with her girlfriends and family. Jayne writes fiction out of life experiences, calling every character fragments of reality strung together by imagination, and strives to tell stories that stick to your bones. She calls her series Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, chocolate lit with a conscience, touching upon contemporary women's issues such as workplace womanhood, race, fertility, modern relationships, and mental health awareness. Her writing echoes her desire to bring both multiculturalism and multidimensionality to contemporary women's fiction with dynamic female protagonists who also happen to be Black. The second installment in this series, and the main subject of tonight's talk, it was just recently published, Black Girls Must Be Magic, finds protagonist Tabitha Walker coping with more of life's challenges and a happy surprise, a baby, with a little help and lots of love from friends, old and new. The series has received praise from a range of outlets, including the New York Times and Good Morning America. It is Jayne's passion to help further the cause of increasing diversity in book publishing and to use her work to help people move past bias in the name of growth, connection, and innovation. Please join me in welcoming over Zoom Jayne Allen, all the way in from the Los Angeles area. Hi, Jayne. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining this evening. It's so great to see all of you. And I'm Jayne Allen, and thank you for that incredible introduction, Chris. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, hopefully at some point in the near future. So I am the author of Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, and more recently, our recent release last week, Black Girls Must Be Magic. And I want to give you more insight into who I am and how these books came about, and the life experiences that informed the fiction that you see reflected in the stories. So a little bit about me. My career, I was a practicing attorney in the music industry for about 8 years. And all along the way, even with during law school and before, I'd always been a writer. I always my spare time and my free moments, I would be writing something. I wrote music when I was in law school. I'd be in class and my mind would drift somewhere. I'd find myself writing song lyrics. I would write songs. I'd write poetry. I'd write stories. And my thesis for graduation from law school, so Harvard requires you in the law school to write a thesis. It's supposed to be a very stodgy research paper, very formal, very, very, typical, some kind of legal issue. And I was able to negotiate my way into, first I wanted to write a novel. And so my thesis advisor is the late Dr. Weiler, and he taught entertainment law, and he agreed to be my thesis advisor in writing a novel, as long as it was something pertaining to the practice of law, had something that had to do with being an attorney or some kind of perspective. So what I really wanted to do was write. Before I went to law school, I read 1L, Scott Turo's book, and I thought this is going to prepare me for law school. But what was missing were people of my perspective in that story. So one of the things that for me was so impactful in my first year, I had a community of fellow African-American students that I could speak with and convene with and be in community with, that when there were particular issues that pertain to my experience as a Black student, I had someone to refer to, and I had people who shared that experience that we could kind of problem solve together. And I didn't feel as alone and isolated as some people, have reported to feel in that experience. So what I really wanted to do was write a novel that was the first year of Harvard Law from the perspective of a Black student and what that looked like from a different perspective. And I started doing that And that did not go well. So that was an abandoned novel. And what I actually wound up doing was writing a screenplay, which I tried to get produced. It's still unproduced, but that was what I wound up submitting as my thesis. It turned into a screenplay. And thankfully, Dr. Weiler agreed to make a bit of an adjustment so I could graduate. But I've written other pieces since then, and it was a long break before I tried to write a novel again, because if you can imagine, that was a pretty traumatic experience. So my practice in the music industry, I learned a lot about the diversification of that industry. So when I went into the music industry, it was an industry in transition. It was going from CDs into digital space, and that really set a landscape change, a sea change for independent artists and different voices to make their way into the industry. So one of those artists that she didn't really start out independent, but she kind of did and built her way, was Lady Gaga. And so I wound up leaving the practice of law and doing marketing work with Lady Gaga just as she was releasing the Born This Way album. And one of the things, most important lessons that experience taught me was the power of building an audience and the power of being authentic to your perspective and your voice, who you really want to be and what you really, really want to say. And that really stuck with me because she honed her voice. She had her core audience. She doubled down in that audience, and it expanded, and that authenticity really grew her career and grew along with her. So she was able to be who she felt comfortable expressing as, and her audience grew with her. So I always remembered that. And I had no idea that I would be writing a novel or be writing fiction. What I actually did do was write a nonfiction book about social media and brand building within using digital platforms to build brands and audiences. And what I thought I was doing was taking the most important lesson that I had learned so far in my life and career. I felt incredibly blessed and fortunate to have had the experiences I had up to that point, being able to work with a global superstar and being at these digital platform companies like Twitter and Google, and meeting with the CEOs, being in a room with the heads of Google and the head of Twitter, and being able to really see these platforms up close and to have a very clear understanding of how they were best used. And so what I wanted to do to give back was to give back the best of what I knew so far. And so I decided to write a book about digital strategy and brand development. And that was a nonfiction book. And that was my first real foray into publishing. And I self-published it. It's published under Janique Seeley, my name, my pen name. I use Jayne Allen for fiction. I use Janique Seeley for nonfiction. And so what I did after that, what I realized is that I really, really wanted to get off of the traditional corporate track. And I wanted to have space in my life to explore my art and to kind of go on a little bit of a roller coaster with life and to give myself a little bit of an adventure. I viewed my law degree as sort of an insurance policy. I put it in my back pocket. And I started this adventure into entrepreneurship and just exploring life and really having some downtime to be able to consider life and spend a little bit of time as a philosopher. I'm not married, I don't have kids. And so I had this extra time that I spent researching, contemplating, and really trying to digest the experience that I was living and seeking out unconventional experiences. So my next foray was I started a consultancy, but then I worked for the artist Prince. And I worked directly for him. He hired me directly. And I spent a lot of time with him individually. And during that time, which was confusing to me in that time, because I was still very, I was business focused, but I had no idea I was going to do anything within arts or artistic expression. But we spent a lot of time talking about being an artist and what it means to be an artist, and about courage and having the courage to make the leap into artistry or into whatever it is that you envisioned for yourself. And we also talked about ownership. And he told me that, the part of how, at least my interpretation of it, part of being an artist is what you own and what parts of yourself you own and what parts of yourself you give away and what parts of yourself are turned into sort of commodity or that are for sale in a sense, and really understanding the balance between all of those so that you make sure that you always have ownership of yourself and your artistic vision and the clarity about that. And I did not understand at that time how that would pertain to me at all, but I knew that the conversations were important. And so I'm forever grateful for those conversations that I had with him. So fast forward, and this was around 2012, and then fast forward to about 2016, which is where I first got the first idea that I could potentially write a novel. And I got an idea for a novel. And at that time, and we were, in the height of a lot of things going on politically in our environment. It was very politically charged. There were a lot of police shootings in the news, and it seemed to be brown bodies. And I felt that time personally unprotected. And I felt uncelebrated. And I felt a bit voiceless and unseen, kind of invisible in this space. But there was all of this tumult and surround that had to do with me, and nothing I could look away from. I couldn't look away from the women's issues. I couldn't look away from the racial issues. I all of it kind of coalesced right here with me in all those layers of experience. And it gave me the idea to write a novel from the perspective of a human story, but really trying to bring the perspective of an African-American woman, a Black woman, to make that meaningful within the story, but not write a story about race. I just wanted to write a human story, but to show the layers of experience, to show what it means to live this story as a woman, to live this particular story as a Black woman, and how that impacts the story. So again, going back to perspective, like I was saying with Scott Turow's book, I didn't see people of my perspective in that story, and I wondered how that would change the story. And same with Bridget Jones and other books that I really love, but I didn't see a lot of Black female protagonists. I'd see some representation, but it would be superficial representation. You'd have a Black friend, she'd have a crinkly hair and a spunky attitude, but I want to know, well, who is she? Why is she like that? Why does she have why is she using humor as sort of a defense mechanism? Who is she? What's going on there? And so I really wanted to do something that could answer those questions for myself and for readers, because I didn't see a lot of that. So that was what I decided I was going to try to do. And I embarked on learning how to write a novel and writing and coming up with this story. One of the core themes in Black Girls Must Die Exhausted also is a fertility challenge. So it was in my late 30s that I'd come up with this idea. And one of the other hidden layers of life that I had been exposed to was that of fertility, reproductive health, and IVF journeys. And it was this kind of hidden world that was such a struggle for so many people there were heartbreaking journeys. It was a war of information and time that people were battling. And I thought, wow, this is really, really important to discuss. It's not frequently discussed in any room that I find myself in, whether it's, women, whether it's Black women, in the community, it's just not discussed. So I think if I'm going to do something, and I want it to be meaningful, and I want to bring a light to these issues of reproductive health and also mental health awareness, because a lot of the layers of experience that we face, leads to these mental health challenges and battles that we don't really have enough vocabulary for, or enough open spaces to discuss and find resources to take that on and to to find a healthful journey with that. So these were the things that were in my mind about what I wanted to craft in this story. And I wanted it to be a novel that when you close the last page of the novel, maybe you won't be the same. And maybe you'll have grown just for reading this book. And that was my goal. So I knew I had to do some soul searching myself, because, you can't really, I wasn't going to write about something that I hadn't processed through and wasn't clear about and hadn't. And if, I'm going to show you the challenges of life, I'm going to show you some of the traumas of life. I'm not going to write unprocessed trauma. I'm going to write something that I've processed enough to bring you through authentically, but give you the emotional payoff of a processed journey, which is kind of life. It's, so I had to take writing classes. I had never written a novel before, and I wound up shaping the story. So here's Tabitha Walker, and I wound up doing a lot of character development in that space. I went back several generations, and I thought, okay, if I'm going to explore race, I think it's really, really important. I have a Black female protagonist, but the construct, the social construct of race, as I've come to understand it, is really about Blackness, and it's also about whiteness. And these are both social constructs. And I thought, you know what, to make this a human story, I need to have a central character, very important character, someone that's very, very close to my protagonist, who is white. And first I thought maybe it was her parent, but that's not the closeness that I needed to create. So I realized it had to be a grandparent, because the relationship between grandparents and grandchildren, in that functional relationship, is just the relationship of pure love. And that, if I could create that relationship and show that and create that intimacy, these two characters could talk about anything, including the things that we have so much trouble talking about amongst ourselves in society. So that is how the relationship between Tabby, the main character, and her grandmother started to evolve and take shape. So that became one of the core central relationships. And then there's the relationships between Tabitha and her girlfriend. She has her girlfriend, Alexis, who married very young. Tabitha is single technically, but has an on again, off again relationship that winds up getting quite complicated when she realizes she has a reproductive health crisis, with very serious life decisions to make about family planning, very early in the story. And her partner is not quite ready for that. So there's a lot of reflection between her and the characters. They show different sides of where she is and her growth journey. She has another friend, Laila, who is she's very independent and very spunky, and she's the strong friend, but everybody has a secret and everybody's hiding something. And as the story progresses, as Tabby breaks down in her journey, as the crisis that she's facing starts to break down her facade of living this perfect life and having everything under control, people around her start to unravel as well. And that unraveling starts to show the vulnerability of who they are and what they're really actually dealing with. So with Alexis, who seems like she has, the perfect life, there are secrets that she's hiding. With Laila, who seems like the strong friend, that strength is a facade for something else that we eventually do find out within the story, and we have to process through that journey while Tabby is figuring out what her decisions will be in terms of her fertility. And she tries everything. She really tries everything. But one of the things that I really was wanted to do with this was show the journey. She has to consider IVF, and she has to learn about the cost. She has to learn about the process. She has to have that doctor visit. She has to see what the options really are for her. And so for me, when I was in my late 30s going through that experience, I wish that I had something like this book, and something that would just at least make me aware of this information when I was in my late 20s or late 30s. So in part, this was me writing the book that I wish that somebody had handed me in my late 20s and 30s. And so when I finished the manuscript, and it took me about 2 years to write, I was gonna potentially take the route of self-publishing. I was thinking, what are my options? And I'd given it to a few trusted readers, and it was actually my father who said, you know what, when he read it, which I was surprised about because he's very busy and doesn't read a lot and doesn't have a lot of time. And so he read this and he said, you know what, this is too good to just go at it yourself. You need to try to get a traditional deal and have some support in getting this out into the world. And so I approached gatekeepers with this novel. And, I was excited about it. I thought, okay, I know this is different. We have this Black female protagonist, but, she's a news reporter. She's, she does yoga. She's trying to figure life out. I know, 10 people like this, and I'm excited to share her journey. And the feedback that I got, which I was expecting people to say, well, maybe you're not a good writer, maybe you're, fiction's not your thing, or, you need to go back to the drawing board and try again. But that wasn't the feedback that I got from, agents I initially approached. It was about the protagonist. And in short, they'd said, well, we don't really like her, or we don't find this relatable. And in short, it was sort of this, we don't think there's a market for this story or this character. And for a lot of people, I think that would be very chilling. And I think that does happen, unfortunately, a lot of times, especially with underrepresented voices. And that's why I guess they're underrepresented. But I had a different belief about the audience and what I knew about the market of readers. I knew that I wrote a human story. Now, the protagonist happens to be Black. She happens to be a woman. And those are perspectives. And those are lenses, and those are shaping the experience that this human is having. But I knew at the core, foundationally, I wrote a human story. And I knew that human beings would be able to see the humanity in the story. And it was not just going to be a story about Tabby Walker. It was going to be some bit of a story about themselves. I wanted people to be able to read themselves in her journey in some layer. And I believed that that was the case. And I believed that the audience for this book was there, and the willingness, the readiness for this perspective existed. So I decided that I was not going to be deterred by the response that I received, and I was going to put the book out on my own. And I did. I hired a cover designer. I hired an editor. I did everything that I could do to parallel the traditional publishing experience. And I put the book out myself in 2018. And the title is Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, which for me was my first act of artistry, because it was such a big, provocative title. And I had never done anything like that before. Again, as a lawyer, lawyers are very conservative. I was still in the music industry, but that's still corporate America. So for me, putting this out there in this way was bigger than me at that time, which is why I decided that to be undeterred, I would use a pen name. And the pen name would allow me a space, a creative space, kind of like Beyonce has her Sasha Fierce. I have my Jayne Allen. So that for me was going to allow me the space to express my artistry in the face of still being afraid. I can do it scared. And so I did it scared. And I put this book out. And I put it out for reviews first. I just spent the first 6 months just getting reviews. It was met with incredible response. And one of the compliments that I got from Black women saying, wow, I see myself in this. There's white men, people of all ethnicities. We wound up going virtually. This was now into the pandemic, while the book was still making its way through the audience, into finding its audience across 5 continents. I wound up meeting with book clubs across 5 continents of readers. And during 2020, during the pandemic, I just put the information out there because as the book started to make its way, I started to have speaking engagements and offers. But when the pandemic hit, all of that got canceled, it went virtual. And so I decided that I would still try to connect with readers. And I agreed to just meet with book clubs. Whoever reached out to me and asked me to join, I would help try to unpack this work with them. And so we were in India and Africa and Europe and Australia and all across the United States. And what I was able to see unfold in front of me was this incredible rainbow of faces and people connecting into the story and people understanding Tabitha's journey and people not seeing it as just a Black woman's journey, but as a human's journey, of a person's search for fulfillment and personal authenticity in the face of societal layers that would otherwise prevent that. That's what this story became. It's a journey of seeking personal authenticity and fulfillment in the face of societal obstacles, of personal obstacles, internal and external obstacles. And so I got comments from students in Germany who read the book. I've gotten a comment from somebody. He said, I'm a gay white male, and I on the surface couldn't be more different from Tabitha, but inside and reading the story, that's my journey. She is me. We're the same. I'm a millennial just trying to figure it out. And so getting that back, it was getting that feedback back was just the encouragement and the it was a great feeling to know that I've been right about this audience. And fast forward to the end of 2020, post George Floyd, wound up meeting the woman who would become my agent. She brought the series to HarperCollins. Harper Perennial Imprint picked up the series, the trilogy, plus a standalone book. So this new edition is the second edition. Black Girls Must Die Exhausted is the second edition, and it has finally been able to really meet its audience with full distribution and support, which I'm so excited about, and it continues to grow every day. So that is the kind of the long and short of how this story came to be. And if you guys have, if there's any questions in the audience that you want me to elaborate on there, I'm happy to do so. But what I want to do is read you a little portion of this book. And one of the passages I'm going to read is it's a moment between Tabby and her grandmother. And like I said, what I wanted to do was explore the experience of race for a human being. Like, what is this? What is the human effect? The societally created experience of race and the societally created experience of gender, and the intersection of those two. What is the human experience? What does that create? What is it on the inside? And for me, I had to process some of that for myself and ask some really difficult questions. So in this scene that I'm going to read you, Tabitha is visiting with her grandmother, and they're going to have a conversation about this. And what I love about their relationship is just the intimacy, and the base and foundation of love allows them to search for answers within that maybe we wouldn't necessarily process so deeply if it was just a casual conversation with someone we weren't as close to. So and the story's in first person if you haven't read these books yet, and it's Tabitha speaking, and she and her grandmother are both named Tabitha. She's named after her grandmother. Granny Tab, can I ask you a silly question? I asked, even though I already knew I could ask my grandmother anything. But this time, what I wanted to know felt foreign as a thought and strange coming from my lips. What does it feel like to be white? My grandmother absorbed my words, took a deep breath, took off her glasses and squinted just a bit, which told me she was thinking. I've asked myself the same question on occasion when I was reminded of it, most of the time by cruel people when I was with my son, Your father, she said quickly, touching my knee. I'd look at him sometimes and look at me and wonder how we could live in a world that treated the two of us so differently when he came from my own body. My skin color changed in the sun too, just like him, like yours, just not as dark. But believe me, I tried, she said with a smile, running her pale finger soothingly across my golden brown arm. I tried to think, was white a hair texture? A state of mind? I could never put my finger on it. Maybe it was just what we were told it was supposed to be because I've never felt white. My grandmother shook her head softly before continuing. So the best I can tell you is that as I've experienced it, it's more of a what it's not than a what it is. I mean, I got reminded of being a woman all the time, but being white, she brought her hand to her face and gently rubbed her cheek. Sometimes when there's no friction, no reminder of what you can't do, it feels like a hole that needs to be filled with something so desperately, filled so there is a something. Your dad, then you, my grandchildren, you have been my greatest something. And I don't know that there is any more than that. We sat still for a moment after that, both of us contemplating her words. It was some time before she spoke again. I never thought to ask it of anyone, not even your dad, whose whole life I watched. Yours too, I guess. I thought I understood from observation, and it never occurred to me how silly that might be not to ask until just now. I reckon I should ask you too. What's it feel like to be Black? Do you consider yourself Black? I laughed a bit in answering. I don't think I have much of a choice, Granny Tab, I said with a smile. To consider myself Black or not Black, I mean. Society just looks at me and sees a Black woman, no matter what I have to say about it. I suppose you're right, too, Granny Tab said pensively. How does it feel? I continued, trying to think and still talk. I'd honestly never considered the question before, not while living it. I can tell you that your thought about it being exhausting, that sounds about right sometimes. A lot of times it does feel exhausting because everything bad in society is about you. But when it comes to the good, nothing is for you. I feel like I'm not enough and too much all at the same time. And then other times being Black feels exhilarating because every good thing that happens feels like a victory, even the small things, because you're constantly reminded that you're an other. So you know whatever good happened in spite of. So there's celebration, there's joy. I paused just to think. It felt so complicated. I pushed myself to find more in the deeper parts, hidden in the folds of my spirit, the secrets. And emptiness is there too, a different kind from what you described, though, a need for validation, maybe to be seen, approved of, to matter as an individual, not just a monolith, and a desire to know that if I do follow all the rules, that I get the promise on the other side, just like anyone else. And by anyone else, I mean anyone else who is white. So that is one of the most challenging passages for me to write in the writing process, because I had to really think and contemplate what these characters would say with, a question that I'd never considered or never been asked and questions that I've never asked anyone and never heard asked or even spoken about. And there was a bit of pressure for me because I had to really remind myself that it just had to be for these two people. It didn't have to speak, even though we don't have these conversations, and it's kind of surprising that we don't. And when you think about it, like, well, why don't we talk about this? But I have to remind myself, it's just these two, and that's all that it has to be true for, and that's where the authenticity is. And so I was most looking forward to writing that passage, and I was also most I was most apprehensive about writing that passage. And so so I hope that you enjoyed that and that it sparks thought for you and maybe brings you to the book. It's a really beautiful relationship between the two of them that that I hope readers enjoy. So so thank you so much for letting me share my story, and I'm happy to answer questions at this point.
That's awesome, Jayne. No questions have come in yet, but Charlene did say that she loved the passage that you just read. Let me get the exact quote. I love that passage, powerful. And Dima, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I apologize if I'm not, but she shared a really nice comment that I want to share with you too. Thank you for the diligence, work, and commitment to your craft. It was such a beautiful story. I loved that I felt seen. My story, my journey, my processing, and the many layers of my own experiences were visible in the pages. I did it alone, but so wish my girlfriends were with me on the journey to unpack it all. I am patiently waiting on them to read it so we can connect and read Black Girls Must Be Magic together. So that's a pretty awesome comment. Thank you, Dima.
Thank you.
And someone else told me that they, in a direct message, told me they truly appreciate you sharing your experience and your specific book. And they're writing books, 2 books right now too, as a lifelong goal of theirs. And they're fascinated to hear from other authors. That was a private message. And Mary D just let everyone know that she's reading Black Girls Must Die Exhausted right now, and it's amazing. And she just received Black Girls Must Be Magic.
Oh, great.
A lot of comments are coming in. Marianne Bravero said you surely succeeded in all you did. Thanks for sharing. And I got another. Actually, I have a question here. A direct message question. It's asking. Says, please ask Jayne how the processing and accomplishment of writing has affected the rest of your life. I don't know if that's a big question, but
well, that is a big question. And I'm happy to answer it. There's a couple of things. I wrote Tabby, and I really just appreciate her as a character. And sometimes I think, and I've really grown to, even though she's not real, but in my mind, she kind of is. I've shaped her, and I feel bad about the things that I have to throw at her, the life obstacles. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, but I know you'll make it through. But what I really appreciate about Tabitha as a character, Tabby, is that there's just a fire in her that is just burns and won't be extinguished, no matter what I throw at her in the story, for her fulfillment, for authenticity. And I get to travel along with her because I feel like she's a bit ahead of me in that journey up towards that. And so I get to draw from the courage that I write into her and her journey for my own personal life. And one of the things that I learned from her when I first written these books and first published them, I had never worn my natural hair texture out ever. I'd always worn my hair straightened and curled, or with extensions or something, but I never, it was never curly like this. I'd never even seen it before. And when I had these books out, and then the cover, there's this woman with her natural hair texture and all of this stuff, and I'm like, how can I write this and write this journey and without, I can do this too, it gave me the courage to see what my own, my natural hair texture was. And then, I wore my hair to work that way, in a very conservative environment where that wasn't the norm. And, so that this process of writing gave me that courage to do that. And so I'm really grateful to that experience. And one of the other things was that I think for me, when I first started this process, I really did have a faith and belief about what people would be capable of connecting, or who people can connect to, that just because the publishing industry doesn't yet know the fullness of the market that they service. Because I was in the music industry and I saw how things diversified and just grew the audience for music, and things, had a dip and then they just kind of exploded with, and then all kinds of different artists and voices and music is, proliferated. Because I'd seen that, I had a faith about what could happen with publishing and just putting something out and giving people the option to read in this way and to see these protagonists and to have them there, and so to know that that was something to act upon, that just because people don't see it yet doesn't mean that it won't happen, or that it's not to happen. You can be the one that makes that happen, and you can be the one to hold your vision of the world that you want to see and act accordingly, and bring the world along with you. And so that's one of the best experiences that I have had from this, and has changed, I won't say changed my life, but has reinforced my view that I just continue to operate in the world, viewing it as the world that I want to see, where we see the humanity in each other, and we connect with each other on that level, in spite of what society tells us our differences are. And we continue to take that journey of learning about each other and supporting the perspectives and the sharing of stories. So that's, aside from having conversations about books and writing, and I have a lot more of those conversations than I did before. So that's been another change to my life.
Very cool. Ruth says, thanks for addressing the questions. She had a great answer. You're beautiful, young, intelligent, creative, vibrant. She's met about a dozen authors. You're a skilled and talented speaker. Stay strong. Best of success.
Thank you, Ruth.
and Mary also shared that she loves the beautiful and colorful art rendering of Black women on your book covers. Absolutely loves it, she says.
Thank you.
If I'm kind of curious about something, if you have time to maybe answer a question, and it's not about the stand-up comedy, even though I do want to hear more about that one day.
I'm sure to talk about that.
You mentioned Scott Turow by name, and across, and if anyone's not familiar, that's like court procedural kind of fiction, very well known. Is there any other works of fiction that you came across when you started realizing you wanted to put together a story, or anything recently released that has resonated with you as something you'd like to share with anyone here that we should check out?
I have a stack of books that these are authors that I've done events with, so I will share. Cool. I do a lot of work, a lot of events with Miriam Shansi. So that's why I have her book here. We did an Instagram live last week. So I wound up taking over the HarperCollins Instagram account. So I had to do programming, and I was like, well, what do I want to do? Conversations that I think are important. So this is about the Haitian earthquake of, this is what they called it, Douze. I believe it was 2011, but I may be speaking. But she wrote a beautiful book that has multiple perspectives in it. So it's a fictional account of a real life event, and it really dives into the human experience of it through the voices of these various characters, some of them who survived the earthquake, some of them who do not. And so it's just this journey of human like resilience and struggle and finding a way forward. And we had an incredible conversation about writing about traumatic events and how we as writers take the responsibility of taking readers through that journey. And so we both have the same perspective, and every writer doesn't do trauma like this, but if we are writing about life, and so life has its ups and downs. If we are writing about traumatic events, we take the perspective that it's our responsibility to bring the reader through it to the payoff point. So not leaving in a space of raw trauma or unprocessed trauma in our writing. So this is one book that I resonated with, The Kindest Lie. I have an event with Nancy Johnson. So she wrote a beautiful book about motherhood, exploration of motherhood and race. And it's just a lovely story that takes place around the time of Obama's election. So it's kind of a fictionalized but slice of life-esque book. And also one that I really, this is recent, In Every Mirror She's Black. I love Lola Akamade Akastrom. I've learned how to pronounce her name because we've done a couple events together too. But this is just a great book. She's a travel writer, and this is her debut novel. But she writes about life in Stockholm for 3 women of the African diaspora. And so Stockholm is a very otherwise like homogenous society. And even the people who are native Swedes, they feel the constraints of society because there's a tremendous pressure to conform to this kind of normalized standard, and this individuality is like there's a desire for that. So when you're not part of the native culture, but you're an immigrant, there's this, that tension is amplified. So just again, telling that human story of looking for authenticity and finding fulfillment and one's authentic voice and place, but from the perspective of these 3 women of the African diaspora. So it's really, really good. And I really enjoyed this book. So hopefully those are all, I've given a whole bunch of, and also Island Queen, Vanessa Riley, we also did an event together, historical fiction. But if you haven't, we've the Bridgerton stories and a lot of the nobility stories, but we haven't really seen what it was like in the Caribbean or with brown faces. So if you want to see a different perspective of kind of that same Regency window and period, this is another really great book of another author that is a friend. So
awesome, thanks.
Give you a whole bunch of things to read.
Perfect. And the Miriam Chauncey, I don't want to jinx anything, but for anyone on the call, stay tuned on the calendar because we have been in talks about a possible addition for her to come visit in May, but we're just kind of keeping our eye on the public health response and stuff. So we're hoping that could maybe be an in-person thing if we push it off till May. So I'm excited about that possibility. I really enjoyed that book as well. With that, I'm seeing no further questions or anything. I really do appreciate you being on here, Jayne. That was a very inspiring talk.
Thank you.
I don't know if we've had an experience of someone getting so into the weeds of their book journey like that, and just really, I left feeling like I could maybe write a book if I try hard enough. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope to talk to you soon. And everyone on the call, I hope to see you around, whether virtually or in person, as we're transitioning back to that. I kind of get around the system. So hopefully we'll be seeing more of you here and get to reading and writing too.
That's right.
Everyone have a great night.